So whenever I'm looking at a location for the first time, I'm always looking at like, all right, what are the coolest things about this location and how can I possibly get the most out of these things? Instead of like forward, we want more to the side, like this stuff, like this stuff, like this, 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 this. The next feature we decided to play up a little bit was accent lighting that was already in the location. This is lighting, you'll see it oftentimes, people will light up walls to make it a little bit more interesting. And in this case, there were all these safety deposit boxes. So lighting those up really created a lot of interesting detail. This is on top of the booths, like back behind them where people are not supposed to be sitting. But we weren't there to eat, we were there to take great photos. So we do get to sit there. You get to do whatever you want when you're a photographer. Not really, but just about. So we put our subject behind there, and this was our chance to really get her to shine because we wanted some of the light coming in from the bottom, but we also wanted to balance that with strobe. So finding the balance between using a long enough shutter speed to get the light to really come up and glow, but not get a whole lot of motion blur, and still use our strobes at a low enough power so they would balance what was going on with the ambient light. Keep in mind these lights are really not that bright. This is supposed to be like a dark room. It's like a dark restaurant. So these lights are not that bright. So to get them to really show up, we had to use a long shutter speed with the camera, kind of bump the ISO up a little bit. Then we had to lower the power way down on our strobe so they weren't totally overpowering this light. And we had to work in how do we going to take these photos and not get a ton of motion blur with our super slow shutter speed. So all those kind of things came into play and to get our image balanced pretty well, and then we were able to exaggerate that bottom light a little bit more in Photoshop. One of the other things we try to do whenever shooting fashion or like whenever trying to draw attention to a piece of wardrobe is connect whatever's going on with that wardrobe to the background. And sometimes you can just do this with light. In this case, our subject was wearing this like really cool red scarf shawl with these like metal things hanging from it. I don't know what it was, but what we did is we wound up placing a red light, basically a bare bulb with two cuts of red way back, like 20 feet to the left of the camera, so it was lighting this entire room red and just kind of creating a nice red glow. And you can see it here in the background of the shots, kind of like showing up. You can see it on these, like a little bit on the vaults, on these little doors, showing that little bit of red that kind of like mimics and enhances what's going on with this scarf. And these little things, like they're small details, but they can make a huge difference in the final shot. So this being a restaurant, there was a wall with these 3 fireplaces that were just total cutouts. And in front of that were like tables and chairs where people would be eating. And this is the place where you get to have a lot of fun and say like, what if these tables and chairs went away? And what if we had another surface here that was kind of like a little bit reflective, that was maybe going to reflect the light that was coming from the fire? It was really kind of like figuring out how to play that fire up. So with that, it's like, okay, we can play the fire up, we can get reflections, which is like double fire, so that's good. And then how do we figure out how to get a subject in here? If she's gonna be like standing up next to one of these fireplaces, we only get to include one of the fireplaces and kind of like be a really weird balance. But if we had her laying down, then she could kind of like lay down and like traverse each one of the fireplaces, and then we could also get the reflections as well. So in building this shot, we were like trying to figure out over and over again, how do we maximize this? How do we maximize this? And what we wound up doing is came up with the idea to have the subject lay down. That way she's like kind of mirroring what's going on with these fireplaces. Not only that, but we were able to like remove the tables and chairs and kind of like bring our own tables in that would create a reflection from the fire onto the table. So we've got a new surface in here that we brought in from a different part of the restaurant, a new surface in here that's creating that reflection. Then we've got our subject laying down. So she's laying down, kind of mirroring the 3 fireplaces. And then we've got the basis for a really nicely composed shot that's got the fireplaces in there, the subjects in there, the reflections are in there. And then from here, all we have to do is light it well, and we know we've got something killer. I wanted to keep the lighting relatively simple, but still give it like a nice pop. So what we decided to do is actually place a bare bulb red light out in the other room behind the fireplaces, because these are totally, you know, there's just holes in the wall. And what that does is it created a really interesting shadow inside of the fireplaces, which just kind of like adds that little bit more of a warmth. From there, we used a beauty dish and a 7-inch reflector with a spot grid on it to light our subject, and really just, you know, keeping our shadows at a relatively low level. We didn't need like a ton of fill here, but we wanted to make sure that our subject did stand out from the background. So there's a lot of play in taking photos and designing light. There's a lot of times when you want to kind of create as many layers as you possibly can. So in this case, we've got, you know, the background like way back behind the subject through the fireplaces. And then we've got our red lights, and then we've got the wall behind her with the fireplaces, and then we've got her, and then we've got the foreground and the reflections and everything. So having all those layers of depth really does help out. And you want to see if you can light each of those layers of depth separately, it's going to help those all stand out a little bit better as well. So that was our goal, and I think we did an awesome job. I love this image, and yeah, it's just a classic beauty light with the fire really does stand out in it.